Hey, Jono, are you ready?
G'day, Ross. I am absolutely ready. G'day to everybody. Ross and Jono with you once again, and we are in the final. I think this is going to be the final.
That's what I was going to
show.
say. I kind of threw a curveball. I decided today, I did decide today that this is going to be like a season finale, man. This is going to be a big show.
I think this is going to be the season finale of the infamous Shapira Saga, or the Shapira affair.
Now, that doesn't mean
referred to.
Sorry, I was just going to say that doesn't mean that this is going to be all we ever do on Shapira. Heaven forbid. No, we're going to be doing all sorts of cool stuff.
We're not done.
We're going to wrap this series up, and what better way to wrap it up than the question that everybody asks is, where are the fragments? Tell us, John.
I was just about to say, because everyone's saying, well, hang on, wait a minute, wasn't last week's program was Shapira has now passed. There was the controversy about how he actually died. We're not sure about. We talked about that last week. We don't need to revisit it. The scroll, of course, is written off as a forgery by the scholars of the day, and so on and so forth. And it's a very sad and tragic ending to the whole thing. But is it really the ending? It's not, because as you just pointed out, the question now becomes, where is the scroll? What happens to the scroll? Where is it now? And here, Ross, we get a little bit Da Vinci Cody. Can I say that?
I like it.
It's just a little bit like that.
I like it. I like the way that you turn that Da Vinci Cody sort of as an adjective, I guess. And it's really cool because a lot of people, I wanted to say this, I don't even know if you and I have ever discussed this. When I was working on the Moses scroll, finding the fragments was not really a big deal to me. I mean, it's a big deal. Of course it's a big deal. But I was more interested in what can we validate the authenticity of the manuscript without the scroll fragments, because people had looked for them, Jonah. There are all these different theories. We're going to talk about some of them tonight. There are theories, and in fact, if you want a good treasure hunt book, spoiler alert, he doesn't find it either, but Tegay's book is really, really good. He spent the whole time searching for the fragments. So I'd already read that. What I was interested in is, what did it say? Now, tonight is something different, because I want you and we've spent a lot of time looking at this, to talk about some of the highest probabilities. Where do we think that the most likely place to find these fragments are? And you and I have some good ideas, and I'm going to I've hinted at this a couple of times in previous shows, but this is the part that's Da Vinci Cody, as you put it. We're going to involve the Freemasons, and we're going to involve them in a big way because they belong in this story.
And there's no better way to have a grand finale, to have a season finale, than a little bit of secret society, Ross. You need that in the story, and it just so happens that we have that ingredient embedded in this saga right at the end, and this is what we're going to talk about.
Yep.
Where shall we begin? I don't want to jump into secret society straight away, because we're not there yet.
Yep.
What we have is where we left off last week was that Shapira, he's dead. He has a chest in the hotel room. In that chest is a bunch of documents, apparently, scrolls and so on and so forth. We briefly touched on that last week. Where did that end up? And where is the majority, if not all, of the scroll? Let's just recap and place them where they are. Go ahead.
Yeah, good point. When the police come in, we have the reports from the Netherlands. We have the Rotterdam police report. We have the coroner's report. We have all of these interesting documents. They've been read carefully. They've been cataloged. They've been translated. What we know is that when the guest reported that guest Shapira hadn't come out in a while, the police go in, they find him dead. They find his personal belongings there. What we know from another part of the story, we have all these different angles reporting on this. One of the most important is Miriam Harry's book, Little Daughter of Jerusalem. She reports as a teenage girl the devastation back home in Jerusalem, and how at a certain point the things of her daddy's arrive back in Jerusalem. Now, So this is kind of one of the things you have to do when you're researching and you're putting this stuff together, is you have to pull all the sources put them all on the table, as you and I like to do when we study together here at the office, and then you pull the pieces, and you it's like you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And so I'll say this, and then we'll go back and forth on this. But the idea that really hit me, I'd been reading and studying and writing, but I think reading this part of the story from the daughter's perspective as a young teenage girl, it choked me up in a really, because I had become so personal. The story had become so personal to me.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was part of the family in a way. But as she tells the story of her mother going through the things, one of the things that hit me is a letter, a clue that's found in a document. So let's call it a dossier in the British Library. It's known as ADD MS 41294. It's papers relating to, this is the title, the forged manuscript of Deuteronomy, and it was given to the British Library by the widow of C.D. Christian David Ginsburg upon his death in 1914, or shortly thereafter. And this was a file, Jono, of all sorts of newspaper clippings and articles and personal notes and authentic notes, not just copies, but personal notes about the Shapira affair. And one of those notes I want to kick us off with tonight. And here's that note. Now, remember, we have a lot of people that we have to remind our viewers of, but we have Edward Augustus Bond. And I picture his name, you say Bond, like James Bond. Not James, this is Edward Augustus Bond. Edward Augustus is the chief librarian at the British Museum. And he writes a letter July the 7th, 1884. Remember, Shapira died March the 8th, roughly, March the 8th, 1884. They found him on the 9th. And he writes a letter to Ginsburg. We have that letter. And I'd like to start by reading that letter. This is the text of that letter. You ready? This kicks us off. He says this. This is E.A. Bond. Dear Dr. Ginsburg, Miss Shapira, in a letter just received, asked to have sent to her a letter of recommendation of her late husband from Lepsius. Now, she's talking about Richard Lepsius, the German, who was at the Egyptologist. And a similar one written by myself, which she states are in your hands. So Bond is telling Ginsburg, Widow Shapira requests the letters, my letter, and the letter that Lepsius wrote about the character of her late husband. So there's people who are putting this together at this very point, and we'll talk about that later. All right. If you have them, he continues, and will entrust them to me, I will forward them to Miss Shapira as she desires. Here's the clue. Get ready. She inquires, Jono, after the Deuteronomy fragments, and says she found 2 small pieces among her husband's papers and sent them to Professor Schlotman. Very truly yours, exclamation point, E.A. Bond. Now.
Okay, so can I ask a question?
Yeah.
When she's referring to among her husband's things, is she referring to the contents of the chest that was in the hotel room that has been sent to her?
I surmise that to be the case. I don't know that to be the case. What I do suspect is I don't think Shapira left any of the manuscript back home. Remember, he leaves with the pieces, parts and pieces, 16 leather strips, which we know that's what he acquired from the Bedouin connection. Yep. And he goes in May of 83 to Europe. He never returns to Jerusalem. So she finds, in going through his things, it says, she found two pieces of the manuscript that was part of this scroll. Now, she knows this manuscript. It ruined her family's life, and she thinks it's basically cursed, but she knows that her husband believed it to be authentic. So I get the feeling that she thought back through her mind. This is the way I put it in the chapter. She's like my wife. My wife hears me talking about all this kind of stuff, and it's just, she's not into it like I am. So God forbid, if I died, she would probably be the same way. She's like, look, I don't know. Who do I send this to? Some of that scroll stuff. And she remembers there was one guy, one name that was a friend to her husband at the worst part of his, when he was going through all the Moabitica stuff. And that's Professor Schlotman. So she takes, now what the report says in this letter is, she put this one thing, this one piece, two pieces of the scroll, but I'm going to show it's one, in an envelope and ships it to Schlotman. Then she tells E.A. Bond, hey, I sent this piece to Schlotman. Now, how do I know it's two? I know it's two because I worked it out with a model made out of paper bag on the floor. We know that there were 16 pieces, and just quickly, I'll make this point. You and I had a great discussion the last couple of nights. I told you I hated math. I do like this piece of math, just this piece. So there are 16 pieces. When Shapira goes to Germany,
this is far more complicated, by the way, than the math we were talking about. But sure.
Yeah.
By the way, before you continue,
for
those who have the book, and if you don't have the book already, my goodness, you people, come on.
That's right.
The Moses Scroll, get it on Amazon. And but it is page 103, and you actually put the details here so that people can follow this along. So while the math may sound a little complicated, it's very easy when you're looking at the page. Okay,
excellent point. Thanks for bringing that up. So what I realized was he had 16 pieces when he went to Germany, and it says that in Goethe's book, Fragments of a Leather Manuscript. He says, look, there are 16 pieces. He describes how many columns of text each one of these 16 fragments has. But from the time, Jono, that Ginsburg and the English see the scroll fragments, they all call it 15. The only way you go from 16 to 15 is if one piece is pulled from the 16. 16 minus the 1 is 15. Now,
you must have had the same math teacher as me.
That's right. And it's very simple math, or I couldn't follow it. So now you've got one piece in Shapira's possession. We know from Goethe that there were two pieces of two. One piece of two matches what Shapira's widow says were among her husband's things. So what we believe, I think you and I both believe, is that when Shapira left the England after it's been totally denounced as a forgery, he takes the one piece with two columns of text, puts it in his bag. He goes to Amsterdam and ultimately Blumenthal and Rotterdam, and he's showing it to different scholars. We think maybe he even had plans to come to America, but he dies.
We're going to have to show people this again, because when you say two pieces of two, they're going, what? So let me just put this here and you tell them what we're looking at.
Okay, all right, hold it very still. Don't even breathe. Two small pieces sent to Professor Schlotman. On this chart, which Daniel Wright made for me, Daniel might be with us tonight, is you have, according to Goethe, he said we had 5 single columns of text, two fragments with two columns each, 4 or 5 of 3, 2 of 4, and then 2 of 5, and that makes up 16. So what I want people to understand is, in this diagram, I have S1, S2 is for Schlotman. The reason I know that that's the piece that was pulled is because if you pull that piece out and you count along the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you go all the way down, you've got 16 pieces. You take those 2 out that are really 1, and it's 15. Bottom line, without complicating, as you said, people can read this chapter and they'll get it. Now, once Shapira, once they take his things and send them back to England, his poor family is going through, they're liquidating their assets. I have read very carefully the bankruptcy proceedings. It's really bad. The family is so destitute almost. selling everything off that was in the store and the family property because their goal was to go back to Germany. Remember, his wife is German, so she's going to bring, and one of the girls, Augusta, is in Berlin going to school, and poor young Miriam, devastated that the love of her life, her father is dead. They're packing up and they're going. They're selling everything, and so that's where the story picks up at this point. Now, what happens to the fragments? So I want people to understand this little 2 pieces that are sent to Schlotman, put that on the shelf just for a moment, because now we've got 15 pieces left. The British Museum still had the rest of the manuscript, the 15 pieces. Remember, that's what Rosette Shapira is asking E.A. Bond for. E.A. Bond, she's like, E.A. Bond writes the letter to Ginsburg, hey, Widow Shapira's asking for the manuscript. Now, my question is this, Jono, I may be reading something into that, but I get this weird feeling when I read his note. It feels like, bear with me, that E.A. Bond and Ginsburg know something about where the manuscript is. And people would say, well, of course, Ross is still at the British Museum. Why is he telling Ginsburg? It makes me think Ginsburg has it in his possession at this period of time, still working on it.
Right.
All right.
So listen, can I ask
Yep.
let
Sure.
me ask some clarifying
Yeah.
questions there, because just so I get it straight in my head. She finds or claims to have found
Yep.
2 pieces of the manuscript.
Yep.
And you're saying that these are 2 pieces that are bound together. Is that
That's
correct?
right. That is correct.
And when I say bound, like, because you've referred to them before as 2 columns, but are we saying that these 2 pieces are stitched together?
They are either stitched together or they represent 2 columns, one piece that is about the size of 2 postcards, connected and not necessarily stitched with stitching, but maybe just a piece of leather that is wide enough to represent 2 columns of text, roughly a foot in width.
Okay.
But
so not necessarily 2 pieces, but certainly 2 columns on one piece of leather. Okay.
But she could look at it, but it could be stitched in bad stitching. She could say, hey, these are 2 pieces.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So that's one possibility. Now,
Yep.
the other thing is that if she is bundling this together and she's sending it to Schlotman, including this piece, believing that Schlotman was Shapira's mate and so on, okay,
Yep.
whatever. But why then is she requesting the rest of it? Does she want to also forward that to Schlotman, or I don't?
She's going to Germany. I think, and I've compared Rosette to Bridget. I think Bridget may not be into this like I am, but I think she would say this was Ross's life. He believed that this is true. I need other scholars to look at this. I believe it. I want to get those back. And first of all, she felt maybe, and here's another option, maybe she just felt like maybe I could sell them and get some money for them. They certainly don't belong to the British Museum. So she wants them back. She might have the intention of sending them to Schlotman as well. We don't know, but what I do think is that she is working as a diligent mother to sell every asset, make as much money to support her daughters and live, Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Is in this regard, is it also possible? Is this a possibility that in the bundle that was that we suppose was sent from the hotel room to the widow Shapira, that she went through it and found a piece, the piece of the Moses scroll, and she refers to that perhaps as one piece, and finds another piece of what might also be another piece of another ancient scroll in Paleo-Hebrew? Do you think it's possible, say, like,
Could be.
is that a possibility?
Yeah. Believe me, look, all sorts of possibilities. What I do want to look at, though, is I'm missing a 2-piece. No one has ever solved this problem. The only way, in my mind, that a piece sent to Schlotman representing 2 pieces, this is the way I wrapped it up. So, but whatever the case may be, she, for what it's worth, identifies the piece that she sends to Schlotman as a piece of this cursed manuscript that took her husband's life, basically. Now, so what happens is, and I've talked to people that are very in the know at the British Museum, and they don't like my theory so much. They don't like this part of the theory I'm going to explain. Their thought is, and I've had this from good sources, they would say, no, the British they're very, very upright and honest, and there's no way that anything crooked could have been going on. So what they surmise, no proof of this either, but I'll give you this one just so you have it, is that Shapira's widow writes, E.A. Bond writes to Ginsburg, and they may have, we don't have a copy of it, but maybe they wrote her and said, hey, Rosette, relax, we're going to sell it for you and we'll give you whatever money we make from it. And so whatever. Okay, well here's what...
See, that's a perfectly fine question, because, I mean, is that not the question that I just asked? Why does she want it if she sent a piece of it to Schlotman? Why they may have perhaps corresponded and said the same thing. And if she said, oh, well, maybe I'm going to sell it, maybe I'm going to do this. Hey, let us take care of that for you. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Go ahead.
Yep. So whatever the case may be, here's what we know, Jono, is that she writes a letter dated the 7th of July, 1884. She wants the rest of her husband's manuscript. What we do know then is that in 1885, in July of 1885, the manuscript that she was asking about is sold. You ready? It's called, this is the lot that it goes up to sell for, lot 302, Deuteronomy in Hebrew, 7 numbered, meaning 7 of the strips were numbered, 8 are unnumbered, written on leather. We know that it was sold to Bernard Quaritch for £10, 5 shillings. And so pennies on a dollar, basically. Remember, just a couple of years prior, word on the street, and I have to be careful the way I say this, Matthew Hamilton has pointed out that he is of the opinion, and he's fairly convinced me of this, that Shapira did not say, if this is authentic, I want to sell it for £1 million sterling. What we do think, because of one of the people that was in the room, and I have his report, I do think that Shapira probably said something like this. Bear with me. I think he's giving his grand presentation. He said, guys, if this proves to be authentic, I don't know, man. I mean, it could be worth £1 million sterling. Okay? Whatever, that number hits the street quickly. And I mean, everybody's talking about it. But that's a lot of money. Remember, we talk about how many, way over 100 million in US dollars today, or in 2021 when I wrote it. But the bottom line is, Jono, if we find this, I want to say when, because we're on the trail. If it were discovered, and if it's sold, proved to be authentic and sold, remember the Sassoon manuscript that just sold for $38 million? If this thing is as old as Benjamin Sass and Idan Dershowitz and other scholars who are in favor of authenticity, if they're right, it would, I believe, go for way more than $38 million, especially if it's what we think it is.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So it sells for pennies.
It sells for a penny. Now, what £10? What's the equivalent of £10 then now? Do you know off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head. I had it at one point.
No, I was just curious. It's all right, but it's not much. And obviously the British Museum has a record of that transaction. And then I wonder, is there any record of transaction if it was sold on the widow Shapira's behalf, for that amount of money to be forwarded to her? Do we have any such receipt?
We do not. We do not. And it's not because of lack of looking. Could be there. Some of my British friends say, of course it's there. British people are always honest. And there's no British person who's ever lied. It's like in the U.S., George Washington never lied. He didn't he chopped down his father's cherry tree. I'll have to tell you that story later. All right, so here's the deal. But there is this view. So here's what we know. It was sold for pennies on the dollar. It ended up, I say pennies on the dollar, it wasn't an insignificant amount. If I remember right, it was less than 2,000, but more than 1,000. So it's a good bit of money, but nothing compared to 100 million that it would have been worth. So we know that Bernard Quaritch bought the manuscript. Now, I've been with the Tylers. We went to England a couple of years ago, and we went to all of these places, and we actually looked at the original documents with the catalogs that describe the sale. And so what we know is that we viewed the selling. The next time it shows up in public, the Shapira, the 15 strips. Remember, 2 strips are gone, or one piece with 2 columns is gone. But the 15 show up in 1887 at what is called an Anglo-Jewish historical exhibition. And I wanted to read just a second. Let me pull that up in my chapter here. I found the catalog online for the 1887 Anglo-Jewish Historical Exhibition, and here's what it says at that entry. So like you go to the Anglo-Jewish exhibition, you get this big honking catalog, and here's what it says. Turning from the sublime, look, get this, turning from the sublime to the other extreme, attention may be drawn to the notorious Shapira manuscripts, which created such a sensation while the question of its authenticity was still sublight, meaning it wasn't determined yet. And then the entry for Shapira's manuscript read this: 15 fragments, supposed to be the original manuscript of Deuteronomy, which you and I think it maybe still is, discovered by the late Mr. Shapira and valued at £1 million sterling. These manuscripts were, on examination by expert, declared to be forgeries, but for a time they created a great sensation. So that's what the catalog says. So people are walking around, well-to-do people, and they've got their money, and they're ready to bid and buy, and they walk around, and you can imagine someone saying, look, honey, let's go see the Shapira manuscript. You remember the fake thing? Yeah, of course they remember. Everybody in the world's talking about this. So this is 1887, and I want you to understand that in September of 1888, Quaritch still has the manuscripts. In other words, they didn't sell up until September of 1888. They're listed at this point for £20. They're still listed in the catalog, but now they're called a forgery. They just plain out call it a forgery, but it is available for purchase, but you can get it. Now, it's...
And I suppose it's, if they declare it to be a forgery like as such, and they're putting that in, in the details of the potential sale, then the value of these fragments, in as far as the British Museum is concerned, or Quaritch is concerned, is that just the fame, the fact that they were in the papers, the fact that there was a big saga about it, the place in history that it holds as a result of that event, is the value to which they're pinning £20. Go ahead. Yep.
Now, one thing I want to add is, remember, we have a letter before the sale to Quaritch from Ginsburg to his daughter Ethel, and he says, "Oh dear Ethel, tell Granny I said hey, but you need to come to town and see this. It is unbelievable. I knew it was a forgery all along, but I would still pay £200 for it." He's offering big money for it. Now, he was at, by the way, I want to say this because it's going to come back in, especially for those who support our work and who want to follow as we're searching for this around the world. Ginsburg is still not off the hook here, because Ginsburg, not only does he desire it, he is at the auction when it's sold. At the auction when it's sold, he's there. And there's some confusion, maybe or maybe not, that says that after Ginsburg dies, a newspaper article comes out and says, Ginsburg was the owner of the Shapira manuscript. Now, he couldn't buy it at the auction when it sold because he's just denounced it as a forgery, and hell, everybody's watching him. I mean, that would be a bad deal for him to say
It would be highly
it's a
suspicious,
forgery, but I'll buy it for.
But I'll buy it.
Yeah, I'll buy it for $200. So anyway, but he doesn't buy it. But I wonder. I have to. This speculation. Does he, at least at the initial point, look who buys it? Keep an eye on it. Maybe go up to him and say, "Here's my card. Here's my address. If you ever want to sell, let me know." So Ginsburg is on the shelf. Yep.
Or Ross, is it a possibility that he may have said to a mage in advance, "Hey, can you bid on my behalf? If I start bidding on this thing, it's going to look bad. Also, if I start bidding on it, it'll probably drive the price up. So can you bid on my behalf, get a deal on it, and I'll fix you up later?"
Yeah,
that
could be.
makes sense to me. Go ahead.
Could be. So there's all sorts of things. Now, here's what happens is that by 1889, and I did verify this, at Bernard Court, if you go to they're in a new building now. We asked them, "Can we look in the attic?" And they said, "Yeah, you can, but this is about the third move since the 1800s." So anyway, we didn't get to look in the attic. But what we did do is we pulled out all the catalogs, and what we did was verify what other researchers have seen, and that is that by 1889, that it doesn't mention the Shapira manuscripts. You go, what happened? And the young guy who's working with us there at Bernard Court says, "Well, it's sold." And I go, who's the buyer? No one has been able to tell who the buyer is. And I said, "I know who it is now, but do you have records?" He said, "Well, they would have been sealed." So here's the deal. If you go to one of these high-end auctions at an auction house for Sotheby, Wilkinson, and Hodge, or whatever, whoever it is, they're not going to list the buyer because you don't want somebody to chase them down, bonk them on the head, and take their prized possession.
Oh, well, fair enough. That makes sense.
Okay. So they don't tell. So then speculation sets in. So what happens is that when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, people, namely Menachem Mansour is one of the great Dead Sea Scrolls scholars at Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin, John Marco Allegro, and plenty of others said, "Hey, wait a minute. You're telling me that you've got scrolls that were written on leather in Paleo Hebrew using interpuncts with black sticky substance on the back, linen stuck in the black sticky stuff, that is found in this, and it's found in a cave, and it's found by a Bedouin. You're telling me that just happened in 1946, 47? What happened to the Shapira manuscript?" And everybody said, "Let's go find it." So they tear it up, and they're all looking for it. So no one can find it. It's gone. It's missing. Now, here's one of the ideas that came up, and it was one of the most popular ideas until 2011. In 1970, an author by the name of Alan Crown wrote an article that was published in a Dead Sea Scroll Qumran publication. I have the footnote in my book. And he speculated that a Sir Charles Nicholson, he's an Australian guy now, or he's famous in Australia, has a major library there. He was a big purchaser of scrolls, rolls, synagogue rolls, Shapira, manuscripts that had come from Shapira's major collection. And there was a fire, Jono, in his house on the 22nd of February, 1899. So you know what people said? He lost a lot of stuff as Shapira manuscript was in the house. I guarantee you, here's what we have. This is the way people leap to ideas and falsity in biblical studies and everything else. They said, Nicholson bought a bunch of Shapira stuff. Shapira's scroll is missing. Nicholson had a fire in his house, destroyed some scrolls, and maybe the Shapira, it had to be. So everybody picked the ball up and ran with it. And they said, "Oh, it's a shame," but it was destroyed. Now, one guy, another Australian guy, I always describe Matthew as the man on the planet for all things Shapira. He's brilliant. He always felt like that didn't sit right with him. Yoram Sabo, another brilliant researcher of all things Shapira who lives in Israel, they're both looking for that doesn't feel right. I don't think they're jumping to conclusions. Then a modern researcher, not too long around the same time, Shlomo Gil in Israel, he wrote an article and he said that that's jumping to conclusions, that there's no proof that the Shapira manuscript burned up in the Nicholson fire. So in 2011, Matthew Hamilton, and I'm giving this based on stories that I've heard from him, and I'm paraphrasing. And he's doing a search, and he's the best at this. And he's looking for where did it end up, and he finds in an advanced, he calls it an advanced internet search, he finds evidence in an October 1904 edition of the Journal of Conchology, published by the Conchological Society of Great Britain and Ireland. It's a eulogy by a guy by the name of Reverend Charles Thornwill, is eulogizing his friend Philip Brooks Mason, who was a fellow, what do you call the people who collect like shells and, like a naturalist. That's not the right term, but follow me on this. And he says in this is what Matthew Hamilton found, is in this eulogy, it says, it's not generally known, Thornwill says, that Mr. Mason became the eventual possessor of the notorious Shapira manuscript, which for a time deceived some of the most experienced authorities on such matters, but was at length discovered to be a remarkably clever forgery. And as I put it in my book, just like that, with a new clue, the name of the last known possessor of the scroll fragments, the hunt was back on. Simultaneously, a woman scholar by the name of Patricia Francis was working on, actually a little bit before we think she made the discovery, she's working on her master's thesis about Philip Brooks Mason, who is from Burton-on-Trent.
Oh, wow.
And she too found that Philip Brooks Mason was the possessor. Okay. Now, once this became knowledge for Shapira maniacs at the time, 2011, especially with Hamilton, he starts really digging in. Now, one of the things we have since learned is that on March the 8th, 1889, so get this, 5 years to the day after the death of Shapira, Philip Brooks Mason met with other members of the Burton-on-Trent Natural History and Archaeology Society. They met, get this, in a Masonic Lodge in Burton-on-Trent the evening of the 8th of March. The meeting, the lecture provided by Philip Brooks Mason was on, it was called The Forgery of Shapira. I am convinced that he thought it was a forgery. He probably bought it for pennies before September of 1889, and he just brought it. I mean, everybody at the meeting of the Natural History and Archaeology Society would have been familiar with it, that I said, oh, this is cool. Now, it said even
and
though...
again, if he's purchased it knowing that, believing that it is a forgery, then again, he has purchased it purely on the basis of its value in its place in history, that it was, front page news for a while, and the way that the saga panned out. That's the reasons why he's got it. He put it on display, didn't he, for his mates? Did he do that at some stage?
He did. In fact, we know, because this is on the 8th of March. I think it's uncanny that it's 5 years to the day from Shapira's death. But we know the following, on the 14th of March, just less than a week later, the edition, the 14 March 89 edition of Burton Chronicle recounted that meeting on the 8th of March. Here's a snippet of that report. We found it. Not even the promise of a paper on the forgery of Shapira, whose alleged discovery of a manuscript of a portion of the Bible caused no little excitement some years back among biblical scholars. And for the matter of that, the general public could induce many members of the Natural History and Archaeological Society to brave the elements on Friday evening, but the few who ran the gauntlet were well rewarded for their courage. It goes on to say later that Mr. Mason is possessed of the whole, they don't know about my 2 strips, of the Shapira fragments, and the audience, much to their delight, were afforded an opportunity of inspecting them. Now, here's what we know. It was a stormy night.
It was a dark and stormy night.
It was a dark and stormy night. I almost started singing A Rainy Night in Georgia. But it was bad. It was really, really bad. Very few people went out that night. The weather was so bad. But here's what happened. At the end of that meeting, Jono, no one to this date, to the time that you and I are speaking live to this audience, no one knows for sure where that manuscript, those fragments are. Because when Philip Brooks Mason died, his wife Annie was still alive. We, the Shapira Club of scholars and people who are working on all this, some of you have heard those names before, we've worked through this material very, very closely. Philip Brooks Mason's will, his last will and testament, does not mention the manuscript strips of Shapira. We do know that his wife distributed many of his things. We've been to his residence. We've reviewed these papers. We've studied this deeply. Nothing in her records indicate anything about the scroll. We just simply don't know. Now, we've been to Burton-on-Trent. We've stayed there. We want to go back again. We've got more research now. We've got more insights. We've got things we need to investigate. And I am of the opinion, and I'm going to bring it around to the Masonic connection here in a minute, but I want you to understand that it's this idea for me, if you lose your keys, where's the last place you saw them? Now, we know that Widow Shapira sent a piece of the manuscript to Schlotman, according to her. Now, what does that tell you? That means that Ross and the team are going to hunt down that possibility. We need people to enlist to help. Now, the other 15 pieces were last seen in Burton-on-Trent. We need time on the ground. We need to interview people. We've been, but we only had a couple of days, and it was rushed, and we didn't really get to explore the place. Now, there is a young guy, a guy, he's not so young, he's a little bit younger than me, but a very sharp guy. He's an attorney, and he's also a historian in Burton-on-Trent. He thinks he's got some ideas, one of which is that the scroll was buried with Philip Brooks Mason. I don't personally buy that, but I'm willing to look at I'm not leaving any stone unturned.
If he has presented the scroll as, that famous forgery, I cannot imagine that would be a prized possession that he would want to be buried with. Yeah. If he doesn't value them as authentic documents. Yeah. That's one theory. Yeah. It's purely coincidence, Ross, that Philip Brooks Mason's surname is Mason, but it does bring us around to our secret society ingredient of this saga. Can we focus in on that? Only
if everyone who's watching right now or later swears, like Pinky swears.
But can you just show them all the secret handshakes so we can just get that over and done with?
I could, but not in this video. So that's going to be another. It's going to be another video. Okay, so here we go. Here we go. Rapid fire. Listen to this, Jono. Could be coincidence, could be merely coincidence, but when Shapira arrives at the office of the Palestine Exploration Fund on the 23rd of July, 1883, he is met at that office by someone by the name of Walter Besant. Walter Besant was then the secretary of the PEF. Secretary is the top job. It doesn't mean he's answering the phone for someone else. He is the person on the ground, known around the world as the man in London that you go see if you have any great biblical discovery, because the Palestine Exploration Fund just begun in 1865. It's the place, and it's where everything's happening. So he goes to him, and it just so happens that Walter Besant is not only a Freemason. We've talked about this before. A lot of men of any stature in Victorian age, particularly in England, are going to be Masons, you might say, but not everyone is. You know, it's not a given.
But most people of note, Ross, would it be fair to say that?
It would be fair to say that people will be shocked. One of the things I'm working on is a document which tells who's who in Freemasonry associated with the missing manuscript of Shapira. So let me just put it this way. Cool. Walter Besant sends out a note to Ginsburg and a few other scholars, and they have, in just a couple of days later, at noon on the 26th of July, 1883, a meeting of the minds, a virtual who's who of anyone who is anyone of note in the world of biblical scholarship in England is at that meeting. Most of those people are Freemasons. Now, we'll say this, if you look at the thumbnail that Seth made for this particular video, the person on the far left is Philip Brooks Mason. The guy in the middle is William Simpson. He's in the meeting. He is a Freemason and a high-up Freemason. And so on the right is Walter Besant. So all three of these guys are very important in what happens with the scroll. But that's not it. A lot of the people, when we talk about Charles Warren, some of these great discoverers, explorers in the Middle East, their meeting, I have read the meeting notes of some of these Masonic meetings that took place when you and I were in Israel on the Tanakh tour in 2015.
2015, we went deep into the, what is that, Zedekiah's caves?
Zedekiah's cave.
Down into what is known as the Masonic Hall, I think, the Masonic Cave or whatever it's referred to. Just a spectacular cave. I mean, just a massive hall-like, flat-ceilinged cave. And they
actually
really
had meetings there. It's not just like they're naming it that. That's where they actually used it. So then it wasn't enough that I found some of the key explorers, some of my heroes were involved in the Freemasons, but what we find is that, remember when Shapira put the manuscript into the Bergheim Bank? Bergheim Daddy, Bergheim Brothers, all members of the Masonic Lodge. Members of the Protestant community in Jerusalem at this time that were part of this whole saga, this unfolding saga, were also Freemason. Get this really surprised me. I was doing, part of my research is to read a lot everything I can find on the subject. This particular book is a reprint. It's called Freemasonry in the Holy Land, Handmarks of Hiram's Builders, okay? It's written by a very important Freemason by the name of Rob Morris, published in 1876. Now, he describes quite a few Freemasons of note, men of note that we know from history that he counts as a brother Mason. Get this. You remember Rashid Pasha, the Ottoman leader who the Bedouin were fleeing from and all that stuff?
Oh, yeah.
That guy was even a Mason. Okay. Who knew? So Freemasonry is very much a part of this. So here's my point. It's almost as if, and I'm still developing this, because one of the things we have to go to do when we're in England is I've already made arrangements to go see a researcher that belongs to the Grand Lodge of England. Also, Shimon Gibson happens to be an expert on the 19th century. He's done a lot of research on Freemasonry in the Holy Land and in England in the 19th century and so forth. So I've got several contacts in England that I want to pursue, and I want to do my own research. Now, here's the big deal for me. The lodge that was the last place it was seen is the Burton-on-Trent Lodge. That lodge no longer is standing.
Okay, no, I was going to say, don't be giving too much away here, Ross.
Yeah, no. I can't tell everything. I'm just going to say it's not there anymore, and so there is an initial dead end, but we do have some ideas to follow up on this thing. So in a nutshell, and this is all people are going to get on this video. Now we're going to go in just a couple of minutes. We're going to go with the Yakad, and we're going to entertain questions about this. So we'll be able to talk a little more freely there with those who are supporting us. But listen, it's a chain of custody. The first person that sees the scroll is a Mason. He tells other Masons. They go to the meeting. They look at the scroll. They consider its authenticity, whatever. The last place it's seen is in a Masonic Lodge. Now, could it be, this is the Da Vinci Code stuff, could be that it's just pouring down rain. The guy who brought it there thinks it's a forgery, and he said, you think the brothers of the lodge would, because some of them were probably Masons too. You want me to just leave it here? I mean, that could be one option. Now, this is where it gets into, if that's the case, I think I can find it through Masonic channels. But it's going to take some work. So I just find that it's the elephant in the room almost that no one's looking for. And I've even brought this idea up to other people, and some of them say, I don't know, maybe. Well, look, you keep looking where you're looking, and I got a couple of ideas, and it has to do with Freemasonry in the 19th century, and I think that it is quite possibly the answer is resting in secret, as are these scroll fragments. I think they very well could be.
Better not say anything more, because
Right.
I want you to be the first there. And but the fact is that there is a trail yet explored, and it's not unreasonable to explore that trail, is what you're saying. And I love it. I love a little bit of secret society at the end of this saga, and particularly if it bears the fruit that we want it to bear. So what we're going to do, Ross, is we're going to go to the Yakad, and people can join that, by the way. Just click the join button under this video and follow the links there.
But not only there, they can also, because you brought it up, they can also join our Patreon. They can join any of the levels of the YouTube channel. They can join Patreon. They can join our Discord. The Yakad is the way that we support our work, and very much appreciate it. We do everything we do at no charge, but this helps us to do what it is that we really need to be doing. So, yeah. And
as a result, they're the people that get to hear a little bit more of the secret handshake information, Ross. I think that's what we're going to go and do. Is there anything else that we want to tie up with?
I think the only thing we're going to say is that stay tuned for an announcement about what's coming next. We wanted, there's so much more to talk about. There's so many more things that we want to cover, not only about Shapira, but you and I have done some fun things on archaeological discoveries in the Holy Land. We work together 3 or 4 times a week. We talk. Just people don't want to miss this. Thursday nights, you and I will do something, and we just haven't yet announced what it is we're coming at them with next. But look, I want to tell everybody, thanks for joining us for what I think is, 16 episodes of Infamous, the Shapira Saga. There are hundreds and hundreds of episodes worth, isn't it? I think that's what it is.
Wow.
I think it is.
Good deal.
Yep.
All right, I like that.
Hey, Jono. Look, go ahead.
Once again, just telling everyone, if you haven't got it already, good heavens, paperback, hardcover, Kindle. There's no excuse. You can get a Kindle, get it straight away. But you need to read the book, and there it is. That is what we've been going through. That is what we've been adding information to that Ross has happened upon over the couple of years since he has written the book, and we've added all of that in for you. So,
all right, you want a secret? You want a secret? You want a secret to go?
Go ahead.
All right, so here's the secret. If you're in the Yakad and you want to join us on this Zoom call, you can get the Zoom link by being a member of the Yakad. You'll find it in the community tab here on our YouTube channel. You'll find it on Patreon, and you'll find it, every little secret nook and cranny we have. And look, thank you for your support. God bless you. Don't miss it. See you next Thursday. Jono, let's go to the Yakad.
Let's go. See you later, guys.